Okay, for those of you who haven't met Sousan before, Sousan is an independent consultant and works in the field of leadership development as well as cultural renewal. She has previously worked with the US Department of State, with Cambridge Leadership Associates, and MIT's Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values. Sousan is a PhD. She has finished her PhD, MPA and MA from Harvard University. So tell me a little about what is it about the Harappa Habits framework that really resonated with you?
Well, I think that I just want to underscore what Ravi Shankar said on Wednesday, and others have said, that in this ever-changing world, that the 5 habits that Harappa is endeavoring to teach are eternal, and they're critical, have always been critical, have always been needed, and now more than ever going forward. And I'm remembering a World Economic Forum report on globalism. I think it was Globalism 4.0, that identified these habits and skill sets as being essential for the 21st century workforce. So I appreciate what Harappa's doing, and in all ways.
Okay, so before we begin with Sousan, let me explain to you what the lead habit for Harappa is all about. For us at Harappa, the lead habit is not so much about leading others. It's about understanding, it's a more inward focused skill. It's about understanding what you can do with yourself. It's a personal leadership journey. It's about centering, it centers on you discovering what are your strengths, what are your values, essentially how do you interpret yourself. It's about figuring out your areas of development, things that you can do to make yourself, better, lead yourself. It's about understanding your purpose in life, in work, in what is it that sort of takes you ahead. It's also about figuring out what are the good practices you can follow at work and generally in life. It's about practicing excellence. And finally, it's also about understanding that change is inevitable. It's there everywhere in our lives. Sometimes it comes as failures, sometimes it comes as setbacks, sometimes it's just a very, very happy event. But anything in life, change is like a constant and it happens all the time. So how do you prepare yourself to live with change, to embrace change, and to sort of move forward? We also have our Embracing Change course, which is available on the Harappa education site. It's currently free. Everybody can try it out. And it's probably one of the best times to have a look at this course. I mean, how do you sort of look at the lead habit as Harappa describes it?
Well, your question reminds me of a quote that's attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, and we'll be talking a little bit about him today. And the quote is, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." And I think Gandhiji meant at least 2 things here. He was saying that we should ourselves embody the change we desire in the world so that we can serve as an example for others. But I think he was also saying that you can't lead others. You can't draw out the best in others when you are not able to do it for yourself. You can only exercise leadership effectively to the extent that you become self-aware and clean up your own act. And I think Harappa's lead courses can help with that. Well, it's interesting because it used to be that people thought that you either had what it took to exercise leadership or you didn't. And if you didn't, well, that's just too bad. And that belief that you're born a leader is what the Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck refers to as having a fixed mindset. So I see that most of our participants have not a fixed mindset, but more of a growth mindset. And Harappa's discusses this in the Leading Self course. And Carol Dweck, in her book Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, describes the power of our beliefs, both conscious and unconscious, and how even the slightest changes in them can have a profound impact on nearly every aspect of our lives. So one overall set of beliefs she describes as a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset assumes that our character, our intelligence, and creativity are static. In other words, someone with a fixed mindset believes that we're born with a certain level of intelligence capabilities and that we can't really change them in any meaningful way. So these sorts of people tend to avoid challenges, are less resilient over time. They give up easily when faced with obstacles, because what's the use of efforting when you can't change yourself? So they're unwilling to put oftentimes effort, and they get defensive when faced with even constructive criticism. And they're threatened by the success of others. Now, the growth mindset folks, on the other hand, know and understand that you can develop your intelligence, character, and creative over time, creativity. The sky's the limit. So those with a growth mindset have a desire to learn. They thrive on challenges, see failure as evidence of not of lacking intelligence, but they use it as a springboard for growth and for stretching existing abilities. Mm-hmm. And they're willing to put the effort in, and they don't mind criticism. But the bottom line is having a growth mindset, being willing to push through limits, which requires effort, optimism, and determination, leads to greater success than a fixed mindset. And there's no one that demonstrates a growth mindset better than Mahatma Gandhi. And he's the case that we're going to do today that I know everyone is very familiar with. Let's talk about Gandhiji. There's an iconic scene from the movie Gandhi, starring Ben Kingsley, that some of you may have seen. It's been Hollywoodized in this movie, and some of the facts are actually wrong. But the scene is powerful and captures a defining moment in Gandhiji's life. It's 1893, and the 23-year-old Gandhi has just arrived in South Africa. He's wearing a proper Western suit and sitting in first class. He's confronted by the conductor and asked to move to the colored section of the train, which he refuses since he has a first class ticket. Soon thereafter, he's unceremoniously thrown off the train for being an Indian sitting in first class compartment. One can only imagine how humiliating and degrading it must have felt. If I was there at that moment, watching the scene dispassionately, and later we'll talk about being on the balcony, but if I was watching, the question I'd have is, what will the young Gandhi do with this upset? We know what Gandhiji did. He had just been rudely awakened to the reality that the laws in South Africa were horribly racist. And of course, what he went on to do is he decided to start a nonviolent protest campaign for the rights of all Indians in South Africa. And after numerous arrests and unwelcomed international attention, the government finally relented by recognizing some rights for Indians. The backstory that you probably also know is why Gandhiji was in South Africa in the first place. It was a last-ditch effort to save his career because his legal practice in what was called Bombay, what was once called Bombay, had all but collapsed after 2 years. His setback was primarily due to the fact that as a young man, Gandhiji was shy and lacked confidence. He could barely speak up in court when he faced a judge. So if leaders are indeed born, there was absolutely no indication at the time that this gentle, timid man would ever lead a movement that would face off against one of the most formidable forces on the planet at the time, the British Empire. So for those of you the few of you who thought leaders are born and not forged, I'm wondering if you are now reconsidering. And incidentally, don't feel bad if you thought that leaders are basically born and not made. That's a very common mindset. And up until the mid-1980s, places like Harvard's Kennedy School didn't even teach leadership. It's a school of government. That was in part due to the belief that many faculty had that leadership was not something that could be taught. You were born with it or you weren't. And so they didn't even try teaching it. And it wasn't until the relentless efforts of a courageous young psychiatrist named Ron Heifetz, who over the years finally convinced Harvard that leadership could and should be taught. And he offered the first course on leadership at Harvard in the early 80s. It's taken decades, but now adaptive leadership and other leadership courses are important components of the curriculum taught at Harvard and elsewhere. And the wisdom of Harappa is that it too starts with the premise that leadership can be cultivated, and that cultivation begins with self-inquiry and developing strong habits of thought and action.
Let's move on to your other really interesting question that you had for the participants, right?
Well, I don't have a question yet, but I'm going to go over the concept of the balcony dance off first, and then I'll ask the question. So one of the habits that Harappa teaches is the habit of getting on the balcony, and it was first coined, in fact, at Harvard by Ron Heifetz. This concept has several different uses, but the way Harappa is utilizing it as a practice is to have us develop the capacity for self-reflection. It's about developing the muscle of self-observation and the capacity to witness ourselves objectively. So the idea is to think of life as though we're all dancing in a grand ballroom. There's only so much we can observe from our position on the dance floor. But imagine how much more we could actually see if we were to get on a balcony and observe the dynamics from there. For example, if we're on the dance floor dancing with a partner and someone all of a sudden shoves us, hurting our arm, our first reaction might be to feel a wave of anger and the desire to push them back with even more force. But if we were to develop the habit of getting on the balcony before we react, we would maybe observe what is going on in our thoughts and realize that an old wound has been, in fact, triggered. And our intense feelings that are arising are not just because of just being shoved by this person, but on the balcony, we recognize that we're especially sensitive to being pushed because we had a bratty older sibling who liked to push us when we were small. Okay. And we felt helpless to do anything about it. And that's why our reaction now is to want to hit the guy back and even harder than he hit us. Okay. So on the balcony, we have an opportunity to breathe into our feelings. Remember that we're not the young kid anymore, and that isn't our sibling. We decide to ask questions, to be curious instead of making assumptions. So that's what getting on the balcony is all about, becoming curious and not assuming. Why did they do that to me? We might ask. Being on the balcony means staying open and neutral. By doing so, we soon realize, for example, that the person didn't even intend to shove us. They were shoved by someone, lost their balance, fell into us. And from the balcony, we see that it wasn't personal or intentional at all. We might even have compassion for that person. So by getting on the balcony, we've learned about our old wound that we still have, and we commit ourselves to inner healing. So this balcony dance floor metaphor helps us develop our capacity to reflect, make better judgments, respond appropriately. So let me ask a question. So this is the question. This time from the balcony. So step up on the balcony, take a deep breath, and let's take a moment and observe what's going on in us internally right now. What thoughts and feelings are we aware of? But also, what dynamics and patterns are we observing in others? So from the balcony, as we undergo this pandemic, what dynamics and patterns are you observing in yourself and in others? So one common dynamic I observe in myself and in others, which is completely understandable, is the tendency to feel victimized by current circumstances. We may feel helpless, out of control under the circumstances, afraid and angry. Many have lost jobs, lost businesses. Some have lost their loved ones, feeling helpless to do or change anything. And we have no idea when or whether life will ever be the same. Another one of the frameworks that Harappa offers is that of moving from the victim blame space to the creative space. So from the balcony, we are able to observe patterns in ourselves and in others. For example, from the balcony, we observe the common dynamic that people under extreme stress have a tendency to blame others and look for scapegoats. For example, many around the world are deep in various kinds of conspiracy theories. I don't know if you've heard of any of them. It's a form of blame. Some say it was the Chinese who deliberately released and circulated the pandemic. No, according to the Iranians, the US and Israel are certainly to blame. No, it was the reptilian aliens. No, it's the moneyed elite like Bill Gates who engineered the COVID pandemic. All this blame game is a huge distraction from actually focusing on doing something useful. The point is that from the balcony, one can clearly observe the dynamics of victim blame going on in others as well as in ourselves, the tendency to want to do that. The benefit of getting some distance on the balcony is so that we don't get caught up in the dance of blaming and scapegoating. So Harappa understands that we can't exercise leadership if we're caught up in distractions. And one of the distractions is this indulging. I mean, of course we feel victimized, and it's completely understandable, but also blaming others, the distraction of blaming others. So to develop the habit of getting on the balcony allows us to become aware of these dynamics and helps us not take the easy way out and rest in victim identity, nor to take the coward's way out and scapegoat others. So when Mahatma Gandhi got kicked off the train in South Africa, did he blame, did he just obsess about revenge or he brushed off the dust and eventually the humiliation, and he didn't stay stuck in feeling victimized, blaming and scapegoating others. He didn't distract himself with conspiracy theories. He kept his heart open, and he took inspired and consistent action that ended up uplifting all of humanity. Now we may think none of us are like Gandhiji, none of us are Mahatma, and of course but Mahatma Gandhi wasn't Mahatma to start with. He became Mahatma Gandhi. And I think he of anyone would want all of us, Indians especially, to know that we have greatness. We all have greatness. And how do we develop that potential? To whatever extent. So Harappa teaches us to move from this victim blame stance to that of being a creator. So I wanted to see what other comments were that people said.
Yeah, so one very interesting question that's sort of come up for us is, somebody's asked us, does balcony and dance floor sort of mean that you start learning how to exercise empathy?
Definitely. And also empathy with empathy as in compassion with oneself. So you start with, I was going to speak of this, that there's an intermediary step. We talk about going from the victim blame stance to the creative stance. And the creative stance is really the question that Harappa asks, which is, what creative actions can you now take in this moment that is consistent with your values that will better your circumstances and the lives of others, even under conditions that might feel like being victimized. So this is what Gandhiji did. But the intermediary step is we also need to take, we need to go inward before we can move to the creative step. And that's being present with our difficult feelings and emotions, the fears, the hurts. We can't be creative when we're caught in fear and pain. And these emotions need to be processed and released. So yes, we have to have empathy for others, but it also starts with empathy, compassion for ourselves, because it's not instant. Oh, well, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I mean, we got to deal with our feelings. And I just want to just shout out that tomorrow, Harappa is generously offering an additional session on just this issue of addressing difficult emotions that may be arising right now. And once we do that constructively is when we can actually step forward in the creative space. So it's moving from victim blame to compassion and empathy and processing the emotions that then let us go into the creative space. So moving into the creative space, one of the things that it means is becoming aware of what you want to create. What matters to you? What are your values? In the Interpreting Self course, under the lead habit, you're encouraged to develop the habit of thinking about what values you have, and based on those values, creating and crafting a vision statement for your future. What do you want to become? What do you want to achieve in the future? What kind of life do you want to be living? What do you want to be, have, do, and give 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now? What do you want life to look like? And what, if you achieved it, would make your heart sing? Also, what strengths do you already bring to the table? And what new skills and behaviors would you need to cultivate in order to fulfill those aspirations? Okay, so I want to end with that, visioning and aspirations and being your best self is also what Harappa is all about. And we know that we're all a work in progress, and that healthy habits have to be developed over time. So this is it's okay. So Harappa, the lead courses encourage you to do an inventory of your values, your skills, to craft vision statements, and to chart your course into the future. It helps you keep your eyes on the prize, as we say in the United States, instead of letting distractions take you off course. So Mahatma Gandhi wasn't born Mahatma. He had the courage and the wisdom to forge himself in fire. And he was an example to all of us of, but again, it doesn't have to be so grand. In every moment in our lives, if you're taking care of your elderly mother as I am, that is an act of leadership. If you're, whatever small steps you can take in life, and they build, it's like a train. I love the in India with the trains, you can see it, in the beginning, you're moving forward and it's so slow and it feels like it's moving very slowly, but that's what it looks like when we first create habits. It's slow. We're hitting obstacles we have to overcome, but then it moves. It starts to move and move and move and move. And there's momentum that builds. And then this train is unstoppable. And that's what we can be. But in the beginning, forming new habits is tedious and it's slow. So what Harappa teaches is becoming unstoppable. And that's why I've loved being part of the whole process.
One of the questions that came in right out of the this thing was, can you explain a little bit more about visions and aspirations? And can you give us a little more emphasis on aspirations? What does that really mean? This is a question that's come in from one of our participants.
Aspirations are dreams. We are our hopes. What is it that we, and so many of us, by the time we become adults, shut that off. And the older we become, sometimes the more shut down we become. That's, sometimes to get in touch with our aspirations, our deepest dreams, is actually to remember our childhood and what it was like and what we were passionate about, what we hoped for. So, sometime around 10, I think, is a good age to remember what were we passionate about? What were our particular aspirations? And we all have different ones in a way, because I think we were placed on the planet with different gifts because we were all needed in our own way. So what are our unique aspirations for the world, our dreams, our passions? And it may take time, depending on how old you are or what you've experienced in life, to dig those out, because many of us have been shamed for having them. Or we're not supposed to have desires. Desires are bad. But desires are, in my view, kind of sacred. There's a notion of divine discontent, which is a doorway to desires or aspirations and visions. The areas in our lives that we are unhappy about, discontent. If we can't access our aspirations, our dreams and visions, sometimes becoming aware of what we're discontent about, what we're not happy about, divine discontent is helpful, because it helps us see, well, we're not happy here, but what would we like instead? I hope that helps explain some of that.
There's one more addition to that, which says, how do we understand the limitations of our aspirations? Our aspirations could be really high, but always we don't sort of get them. So do we train ourselves to understand that?
Well, here's the trick. I actually teach this extensively. This is part of what I teach. So the trick is to have a vision, but not hold tight to it. It is the vision for now. And the whole point of it is to elicit, to take you in a certain direction, but not, you don't want to hold tight to it. You want to not be attached to the outcome, turning out exactly that way. You want this or something even better still. Your mind can't always understand what the better still is. You don't know yet what that better still is. There's something higher at play, I think. This is the way I think about it. There's something infinitely higher at play. But from the human, we have a vision and aspiration that takes us in the right direction. We're following our instincts towards that, but it won't ever end up exactly as we vision it. Well, sometimes it will, but often it doesn't, and that's okay. So we propel us. We're not afraid to dream. We're not afraid to open our hearts and with passion go forward without demanding that it look exactly the way we want it to look. We get there. We have to release the outcome.
How can you be kind as a leader and not be taken for granted at the same time? Is there a way to develop a balance?
First of all, I really have compassion for the person asking that question, because I have often and at times felt like I've been taken for granted. So I understand that. But here's the thing: when you're exercising leadership, the point isn't recognition or being taken for granted or not granted. I mean, that's again the personality, right? From the balcony, let's look and ask. So I'm asking you, my friend, what's the wound? You know, where is the feeling of feeling taken for granted? I've actually had to work on that myself quite a bit. And many, particularly I think women, but we might feel that way. I don't know if the asker is a woman. But there are ways to, not be taken for granted, as in to own your gifts and not be afraid to stand in your knowing about your gifts and to speak of them. But that's a different issue than leadership. Leadership, you can't be in the game. You can't exercise leadership hoping to be recognized or not taken for granted. You've got to separate those things out. So again, this is part of developing your capacity to get on the balcony, to heal the wounds, to heal the part of you that feels taken for granted, and learn the skills so that you could be exercise leadership and feel recognized in the ways that are appropriate too. But that shouldn't be the thing that compels you. Gandhi didn't, people who are effective aren't needy in that way. And I don't mean needy. I'm not being derogatory. I have that need myself to be recognized and not be taken for granted. So it's not a bad need, but leadership is about being so in your purpose and so caring about the whole system that you're not focused on your own need to be taken, to be appreciated.
I'm not sure if this is a question that, sort of talks about self-leadership, but let's ask in any case. Is aggression an essential part of learning how to lead yourself? Or is aggression an internal part of learning leadership?
I would say categorically no.
Okay.
Aggression is often part of, I and the groups that I've worked with, adaptive leadership, we use the model where we distinguish leadership from authority. So aggression is often associated with being an authority figure. Now, people in authority may or may not exercise leadership. We have lots of people in positions of authority who exercise no leadership. They, in fact, mislead their people. So for the way I think about leadership is something you do. It's not something that you have the qualities, but authority is a role you play. Leadership is not a role. So people who are aggressive, they may be aggressive. They're in positions of authority. Partly because they have authority, they're aggressive. They're aggressive, and therefore they've gotten authority. I don't know what if you look in the wild at the gorillas, the dominant wolves, the dominant gorillas, the dominant monkeys are all the more aggressive ones. So sure, that from that animalistic perspective, yeah, but that's not leadership. That's authority. That's not leadership.
Okay.
Now, also, there's assertiveness. You could be assertive, but that's different from aggression. And maybe that's what the writer had been asking about.
Are there certain trusted frameworks we can follow to lead ourselves to becoming our best selves? And how do we keep going in that direction?
Well, there's a number of different frameworks. I've worked with different personal development coaches. There are very popular ones out there. I worked with a woman named Mary Morrissey, who was a mentor of mine. This is outside of Harvard when I did kind of more of the personal development work. And she has a beautiful program called Dream Building. And she's part of a group of wonderful people in the United States and mostly in California and other places that are, personal development. But there's so many wonderful people actually doing this work right now. But she has a framework. Mary Morrissey is her name. Of course, there are, gazillion people and people like Tony Robbins and others that I'm sure people have heard of. It almost doesn't matter what you pick. I mean, there's so many wonderful people. It's just to keep going every day and not be deterred. It's the daily, even small steps of personal development that end up accruing over time. But
Okay.
if I may just say one more thing.
Yeah.
The emotional work is also really critical. And we tend to run away from the emotional work, meaning to really access our feelings, the difficult feelings, and to have, a way to process them and release them efficiently, effectively. And there are a number of books and people that I've worked with that are really exceptional in that.
How do you overcome the imposter syndrome that people start feeling in leadership positions? But this is like a position.
I love that question. Whenever I give talks, I have a discussion on the imposter syndrome. And, the way it is a constant companion, that voice in my head. So I completely understand that question. Here's the thing. To recognize that we all have, well, maybe we don't all have it, but many of us have it, that voice. And that it's just a thought. There's no truth to it. And, at this point in my life, I've gotten used to, these various voices that might discourage me in one way or another. And it used to bother me. I used to try to ward away from it. Now it's okay. You're welcome to speak. Thank you for your message. I'm not listening to you. You do it anyway. You just do it anyway. And that's what courage is. You might have fear, but you do it anyway. So that's the voice. I want to just to say one thing is, I remember when I first arrived at Harvard, I was in the graduate program. I was 23 and I thought they must have made a mistake to admit me to Harvard, so it was the imposter syndrome. And I happened to hear I can't remember if it was the dean of Harvard speaking to I was in the graduate program. I had gotten into Harvard Graduate School, but I was in a place where I heard the dean speaking to the undergraduate class that had just been admitted. And Harvard's one of the most competitive. I mean, it's very hard to get in, right?
Sousan, we need to.
Okay, I just said, he said to everybody, all of you here sitting think that we made a mistake and that you're here because of a mistake. Just know that you're here. We know each of you, and you're not a mistake. So in that sense, none of you are a mistake, that you're in a position of leadership for a reason, and that we all have the capabilities.
So I'd like to just quickly look at Sousan's book list, but we also want to say that these are the books that Sousan is recommending. Which one of these is a must-read, Sousan?
Well, my favorite one is the first one, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership. And in fact, any of the books that you read by Ron Heifetz, I think are exemplary. And that's by far my favorite book. The other books, I was thinking this morning, and I've recommended these other three, but I was thinking this morning that really the way to learn about leadership is to read about the lives of exemplary people. And Gandhiji's autobiography, but also there's a beautiful biography written about him, is incredible. And also Nelson Mandela, his autobiography is incredible. So though it's worth reading books about people.